Hello and welcome to the Project Hope podcast for families and friends with a loved one in a group of high demand, high control. I am your host, Jennifer. A lot has changed since I first started this podcast, so I thought I'd add a little to the initial introductions and provide something that's more up to date. I work with survivors of coercive control one-to-one. I also consult with families, and I offer education to the public around such topics. For the full scope of what I offer and also my credentials, you're welcome to check out my website, jennifer-french.com. I have a master's in the psychology of coercive control, and as of August 2024, I've been accepted into a PhD program called Psychology, Policy, and Law, and I'll have a specialty in either criminal behavior or forensic victimology. This will support the work that I currently do as an expert witness in cases involving coercive control. The Project Hope podcast has provided such an amazing opportunity for me to meet many wonderful people, survivors, experts, family members, and it's truly a pleasure to meet each one of these individuals you will hear from. This podcast will conclude with season 2 as I enter into my PhD program, but I have many other exciting things on the horizon, so please stay in touch and go to my website for any and all current events. Thanks to all of you who listen to Project Hope and care about this community. It is such a pleasure for me to introduce many of you to Ken Garrett. Before you begin this episode, I just want to provide a trigger warning regarding religious, spiritual, and sexual abuse. So please be aware of that for yourself or any young people that might be within earshot. Ken is currently the senior pastor of Grace Church, located in Portland, Oregon. He's the founder of the Spiritual Abuse Forum for Education, and he's also a member of the advisory board of ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association. Many of you have heard me refer to that a number of times, so I do recommend checking it out as an incredible resource sort of at the forefront of cultic studies. Ken and Sharon, his wife, have 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren whom they see often. Ken has written a book called In the House of Friends, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Abuse in Christian Churches. You will hear a little bit about the book during our discussion, but if you'd like to hear a little more, please stay tuned for the outro of this 2-part series podcast. I will be sharing a bit about what Ken says about what makes churches abusive. From 1984 until 1996, Ken and Sharon were part of an abusive church with a pastor who is still in an ongoing legal case. However, in January of 2020, so fairly recently, a jury found the pastor guilty of the sexual abuse of a minor and sentenced him to 160 months without the possibility of parole. During our interview, you'll hear that some of these details have changed, but it doesn't sound like there's a high risk of the verdict being overruled. Ken's book is a wonderful preventative resource that I would recommend for all who are or want to be part of a church community. Or if you yourself are in the ministry, this is also an excellent resource for leadership. That said, I hope you enjoy this 2-part discussion with Ken Garrett. Welcome, Ken Garrett. I am delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you today on the Project Hope podcast. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you for having me, Jennifer. Glad to be here.
Yes. So I wanted to just begin today by seeing if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit of your background about the abusive church that you left, maybe a little about the time frame and kind of the impact of that. But I also just want to mention, actually, I'll just mention here, Ken, and then at some point during the interview, we'll dip back into some elements of the book that you've written called In the House of Friends. And I am so excited to share this book with others and to dive into a little bit of a discussion around it. But for our listeners, Ken does this sort of beautiful job of opening the book with a bit of a personal twist of a courtroom scene, actually, and then finishing the book as well with the final update of the court proceedings. And so I really love that that kind of the meat of the book is sort of flanked with the personal story and the kind of familial connection into this world. But the information is fairly minimal. So I feel like in getting to talk to you, Ken, that it may fill in the blanks a little bit for some of our listeners.
Sure, that would be great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, well, I should start out by saying that when I wrote the book, that was a final chapter, but the court's proceedings have moved on a little bit more. It's still a live issue that the abuser in my situation is he is out of prison, wearing an ankle monitor and awaiting what will be his third trial.
Ken, I did not realize that. I thought, our last little, the epilogue, but that it was our closure to the entire case. Wow.
Which, it's a really... It's not something I ever would have planned, because I was glad that justice had been served and people were protected and he was put away. But some recent developments with the Supreme Court and appeal process and whatnot has resulted in him getting another trial. It does not appear to be a good prospect for him in this third trial. So I don't think it'll go well. But the district attorney's already filed in Multnomah County for a third trial to get him back, and he's wearing an ankle monitor and everything now. So, but the part about my book that actually makes that okay is that it emphasizes, in a very practical way, the unfinished nature of healing from spiritual abuse. Yeah. I would love to have just finished that book, put a period on the last sentence, and then just gone off being a pastor, doing what I love, and loving my three beautiful daughters and their husbands and partners and my grandchildren. I mean, I would just love to kind of think that I'm riding off into the sunset with that. But the unfinished business of the abuse that they suffered and that is still a criminal case in the courts has served to kind of underline in a practical way that the healing and the trauma and issues of spiritual abuse don't just go away suddenly. And I'm sure as a therapist, you know, and as a pastor, I've gotten increasingly comfortable with saying, this is going to be a tool in your life for the rest of your life. Let's learn how to use it and live with it and see what kind of unique and powerful person this will shape you into. But the work is not going to stop. It's like it's going to go on and on and on. So it doesn't really get closed the way I want. So yeah, that's kind of the way to start.
Thank you so much for kind of opening it in that way. I do really agree that is so symbolic of the process. And it is quite surprising in the process of recovery how the layers and layers that need to be kind of revisited and shed and new skin acquired,
Yes. Yeah.
and also really the power, I think, of this type of healing experience is also pretty tremendous. I think there's something about such fundamental violations that then force us to have to really get real, dig deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really face truths about ourselves and who we're going to be in the world when there's wounding that's happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like this community also I've met so many incredible people, and the bravery and the, also in that healing process, the speaking up and speaking out,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is part of what I've really just so loved about this podcast, and people really sharing, the gifts that come from that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yes.
We of course, we show great concern over the effects of multimedia and the internet, that, children are turned into little robots and don't have friends and look at a screen all day. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but we're concerned about those effects. But there are also some magnificent effects. Finding a vaccine, finding help, reaching out, just the practical day-to-day things you might need. And then also finding other victims and other people that can relate. And my life has been deepened and enriched through this healing. Doesn't mean I would want to go through it again. Who would?
Right.
But you're right. There's a strengthening and a deepening that happens. And a lot of that happens just like with you and I meeting is through taking advantage of these resources in a way that lets survivors have a voice that they just didn't have before, particularly in the religious world that I'm kind of coming from as a pastor. Churches are generally very closed. And there's a lot of reasons for that. They aren't so much theological reasons as cultural. In America, there's an attempt at the separation of churches and states in the government. So churches really do have an idea that they are the final arbiters of what forms of what they might call abuse will get out there or not. And that is their call if they should choose to cooperate with the outside world.
Right. Not only this, of course, is kind of the main complaint, I think, around this whole, organized churches in general, right? It's that the system is pretty self-contained. And so when there are actual laws being broken, it tends to rise up in the hierarchy of that system versus being presented to secular authorities.
Yeah. And you'll find it actually in some churches, covenants, if they have those, and kind of policy papers, that complaints of abuse or improprieties, misbehavior of anyone in the church, and especially staff, should be brought to the channels of the spiritual abuse. Up at the top, it's usually a group of men who will decide if your complaint merits outside intervention and help, or if they'll take care of it on their own. Yeah. And when I first went to seminary and started in all of this, that plan was still out there as if it was workable. But now there is a new day coming, and that plan is seen for what it is: completely illegal, often criminal. and it's very heartening to see so many churches kind of coming around and saying, oh no, step one, call the police. Step two, call the pastor or whoever you're comfortable calling and say, here's what I've done, here's what's going on. Yeah. And we're going to treat this in a way that is victim oriented instead of organization oriented. So
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't talk about me at all there in terms of my history, which I'm supposed to be doing.
Well, Ken, since you and I have already spent some time together, I'm sure we'll both travel the long and windy road in this interview.
Okay.
So that's all good, but I will bring us back to that. So I'm sure our listeners are interested to just kind of hear, what was going on in the abusive church experience that you had. And it is my understanding that it was quite a while ago at this point.
Yeah, it sure was. Okay, I guess going back to the beginning of that experience, it would be in spring of 1984. My wife and I, Sharon, we had met as teenagers, and I was in the military, and we got married and moved around a little bit, and we came home in 1984 when I was 24, and Sharon was, I think, 22, and she was pregnant with our first, and we came home out of the military and then back home to Portland, where I soon found a job doing what what my profession was. I was a paramedic. So I jumped right into that and was right on an ambulance and running calls and everything in Multnomah County in Portland. And Sharon was pregnant with our first, and our marriage was, I don't know if any new marriage is with younger people like that is really simple or easy or even healthy. I mean, because you're just clashing you're bringing these two lives together. And so we were
and we never give people the skills of communication.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In your 20s. So
yeah,
that's really hard.
Yeah. And that's how it was for us. And I sometimes think of poor Sharon. I mean, obviously he had to deal with me, my life. I didn't grow up the way she did. I grew up just a little rougher. I mean, I still went to church and everything, but I had a lot more experiences. And I was quite a partier and everything, and she wasn't. And so suddenly she got married to me, and I took her to my post where I was stationed, which was Fort Bragg, North Carolina, with the 82nd Airborne. I was a paratrooper.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of behaviors that I thought were just normal kind of fun stuff that we paratroopers did, I realize now for Sharon, it was like, I don't know, being a Stradivarius violin thrown to a bunch of monkeys in the zoo or something. It must have been pretty interesting for her. So the reason I say all that is that, and then after some transfers, I got out I was at Fort Ord on the coast in California there, and we came home. So the point of me telling all that is to just say that we were culturally in a bit of shock.
Yeah.
And we were both Christians and really wanting to follow our faith and all of that. And we were also both very enamored with the concept of communal living. We weren't exactly children of the 60s, since I was like 9 years old when Woodstock happened, and she was even younger. So it's not like we were really from that era, but we identified a lot with its values and the Jesus People movement that came out of Southern California, and Keith Green, who was a great musician who was into all that, and so we really came out primed for community. We wanted to find a group of people that we could fit into and basically spend our life with.
Yeah. As
Christians. Now, for Sharon, that meant a lot of very authentic and close relationships with other people in this community, and raising kids together, and just all of that kind of value. And for me, quite honestly, it meant a career path of going into the ministry to where I could preach. I loved speaking, studying the Bible, preaching, and that was what I wanted for my life. And so I was looking for that, and she was looking for something a little different. And we met these group of people in Portland who were living kind of communally at the time, but had this what we felt was serious value for the practice of our faith. I mean, they would describe it as a day in, day out thing. We would hang together, picnic and barbecue together. We would live close together in a neighborhood, and just kind of start building the kind of community that we felt was consistent with a Christian kind of, early Christian church thing.
Yeah.
And so in the course of that, we joined the group and were increasingly drawn in closely to it, and in our lives getting real entangled with the lives of the other community members. I think there was about 30 of us total and a bunch of kids. And the standards of lifestyle were very, very high, strict, I guess is a better word to use for it. Especially in terms of attendance and financial contribution. And I mean, it kind of had a price, but it was.
May I ask, did you actually know that going in, or was that something that kind of evolved?
It evolved. Yeah, it evolved. And that's really good that you bring that up. Nobody knows going in what is really behind that door. Okay. So it did evolve, not so much the demands, but the sharing of those demands with us. And the way it evolved was through small slights and small experiences of social and emotional withdrawal from the group when you fell short of the demands.
Yeah.
So if it was expected that you would be every Wednesday night at Bible study, right? Every Wednesday night at 6:00, Bible study and then prayer. If it was really strongly expected that you would be there, you weren't told going in, by the way, to be a member of in good standing here and enjoy all of this goody, lovey communal stuff. You need to be here every Wednesday. So the first time that you said, hey, I think we're just going to go to a ball game this Wednesday. We'll see you next Wednesday. Or, yeah, it's my mom's birthday. You would get that withdrawal that let you know you were bumping up against a group value here.
Yeah. And
so it's very, very subtle. So we did not understand that at all. So those kinds of things started popping up with us.
Yeah.
We had our first child a few months after moving in, and oh my goodness, I just feel horrible thinking of Sharon's experience. Excited to have a baby and everything, and yet you get into a community that really doesn't celebrate babies. I mean, it manages them and loves them, and like a parents love their children, of course, but really this is all about the vision and the dream and drive of the pastor.
Yeah.
And so that was tough. In the course of it, from 1984 until 1990, we sold our house, bought another house in the community where the church lived, which was a pretty rundown part of town, and there were mostly rentals in that at that time, and we kind of moved into, I think we moved into upwards of a dozen homes in this little block area, and started building our Shangri-La, tearing down backyard fences and barbecuing together and all of this. And it really wasn't bad, except that we were kind of an insufferable bunch of religious, I don't know if I call us Pharisees, but we just happened to know we were right about everybody and wanted to draw everybody in.
You got your dogma on.
Yeah. We were not nice people, I think, but anyway, things were working out, and then a change started happening.
And also, may I just quickly say, when you say not nice people, it's always so interesting because, truly I've spoken, even on this podcast when these topics have come up, where so many of us, I think, reflect back, and now you're kind of able to see, I would qualify myself as a not nice person at that time, right? Yes. By your standards today. But when you're in it, you're certain, there are just so many other layers of teachings and messages that allow you to think, for example, preaching the gospel and trying to convert people and bring them in is about
how's that not
saving
nice?
Them. Right. How's that not nice?
Saving them. Yeah. Do you nicely pull a drowning man out of the waves, Jennifer? Or do you just pull him out? So,
well said, Pastor Ken.
So, yeah, that's good. We were framed and driven by what's called in Christianity the Great Commission. I don't know if you've heard of that. Matthew 19 or Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you, and surely I will be with you always, even to the end of the age.
Oh,
There's nothing. Jesus'
so
last words. Huh?
It sounds so loving.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was from him.
Yeah.
And those were the last words he left, words of assurance. I'll be with you. Share this good thing. But there's nothing in that statement about be a good person, as you do this. Yeah. Don't bully people. And so oftentimes when groups pin their ideology on these simple little one-shot deals from the Bible, they manage to leave out the parts of it that would most challenge themselves personally. All that to say is I did that Great Commission stuff, sharing the gospel with my paramedic partners at work, and sometimes would have them in tears as I, peeled back their lives and argued for why they should follow Jesus or come to my church or something. Yeah. And it was a real violation of people, but I justified it, and I didn't work hard to justify it because you know what, Jennifer, I didn't care that much. I was doing God's work. Yeah. And the way that I did God's work meant very little to me, as much as being able to report back into my church how I had shared the gospel with my partner at work, my gay partner or my alcoholic partner or my partner that was something, some kind of a big trophy, Yeah. And so, looking back now, I look at myself with kindness. I'm 61 now, and I'm not going to smack that 24-year-old kid around. I know what he was carrying and, and what he was feeling at the time. But I wish I would have been sweeter to people and loved them despite what church they went to or what religion they had.
Yeah.
That's not. Yeah, I don't say that to mean that my faith is less important to me or anything like that, but that my faith has no chance of doing anything good for anybody if it's given to them through an undeveloped and kind of a nasty personality, Okay, little digression there, but you get what I mean. That's kind of what we were into. So the big change started coming in the late 1980s, and that was when our church did not grow, and we began to act like a church full of controlled people. It doesn't mean that we were a fundamentalist religious-y type group. We all smoked, and we smoked the same brand of cigarettes. That's how you know we were unhealthy. Unhealthy physically to smoke anyway, but the fact that everybody or a lot of people end up smokers who weren't, and then all smoke the same brand. Danger, Will Robinson. This is, we're all smoking.
What an interesting symbol.
Yeah.
Really?
We're all smoking, and we're smoking Salem Slim Lights. And that was a good subtle indicator for the pastor of how he was drawing people into a separate cult sect that would experience disdain from the larger religious community and parents and everything. Suddenly, good grief, they're, smoking like chimneys, drinking like fish, of course, drinking the same brand of beer, which I might add was not good beer. But those things ended up being small ways that the pathological nature of our leadership began to dismantle the individual conscience of our members.
Yeah.
Husbands and wives wouldn't sit next to each other.
Oh, interesting.
And it was never a rule. And I've seen other groups, I've met with other groups that do this too. And it was never a rule. It was never like anybody ever said, by the way, at this church, husbands and wives don't sit together. It was just suddenly violated in a way that you would begin to sense disdain and judgment if you sat next to each other.
Yeah.
You have all day to sit next to your wife. You sleep with your wife every night. You're with her all the time. Why do you need to come to church and be, what is your problem? Insecure or whatever? So weird little ways that we changed in our behaviors and values. These represented small dismantlings of the family.
Yeah.
And it was really strange. And then also and we ended up living communally by renting very large homes on a mountain, which we have lots of mountains around here, right up the street. Mount Scott. It's a beautiful kind of a group of three mountains actually in southeast Portland, and we rented big homes up there, like split level, 3-bath, 5-bedroom, big deck, because we had all this money from people giving their money, and we would have maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 families occupy these homes, and we would adapt them and build on things, and we would live communally with the idea that we were experiencing more intense spiritual formation from our leaders, more Bible study, more real character formation, like not just learning the Bible, but also exploring how you relate to the community when you're cooking dinner and how you might become a more loving person instead of that selfish person that demands his Texas Pete hot sauce at every meal. Right. Little personal information there.
Right. So, the natural creation of flexibility that comes and the challenges of living in community.
Yeah. Well, that was beaten down.
Yeah, may I ask, Ken, was the pastor a part of this? Was he living there as well, or?
Yes. Jennifer, I was actually one of the honored people that I moved in with the pastor for discipling by the pastor. Of course, I lived upstairs, but by the time I moved in, it was Sharon and I and our 2 older daughters. And we lived with the pastor, who lived in kind of an apartment in the basement, bottom of the house and everything. And he had some problems, like I kind of mentioned them, in just the last few minutes, but with alcohol, drugs, and then what came to be sexually, being a pretty voracious person at grooming and going after women in our church. Yeah. And so that kind of started coming out. And his world, which had been a private world of this, what we would call sin and horrible things, parts of it, I believe, that had been carefully cultivated by him were allowed into the community so that he no longer had to live this schizophrenic existence of Bible preaching Pastor Mike most of the time, but then the other times, Jack Daniel's shots with a beer back Mike. And those worlds were probably driving him a little into quite a crisis. Yeah. So he naturally began to bring them together. And our church followed him down that rabbit hole, basically. People that had never touched a smoke in their life are suddenly smoking Salem Slim Lights, especially people that had grown up religious in churches. I was, like I said, I'd partied a lot and everything. It wasn't exactly shocking as much to me, although it concerned me that, my wife, who I don't think she even had a drink before she married me, and we got a margarita out for her. I mean, just suddenly she's changing, and many people are changing. And especially the pastor, began really relating inappropriately with the wives in the church. More time with just him and them, more socializing with them. And the husbands would often be working and then come home, and it was not happy for the wives or the husbands. Yeah. It was no treat to spend the day with this guy on the one hand. But then on the other hand, your marriage, there began to be this rift in it. And the rift was the church.
Yeah.
And and to a person like myself who was very religious, motivated, wanting to go somewhere, it was really hard to pull out of that because I wanted God and I wanted to grow as a Christian. I wanted all of this good experience. And it seemed to me I could only get it there. And the cost was beginning to be my marriage and the rights of raising my children.
Yeah.
So it began to be a very conflicting time for me around 1991 or so. I was 31 years old. And that led to some really hard years of lots and lots of alcohol abuse and drug abuse. My particular flavor was cocaine, so I was down that road. I know that sounds a little weird being a paramedic using cocaine, but every paramedic out there goes, oh, okay.
Right. Well, and I feel like people who are in the medical field often have access to drugs. So
Yes.
truly drug abuse is actually pretty common in that
Absolutely.
arena.
Yeah. And at the time, of course, I would have just said, well, I'm a really horrible person. And so I'm doing these horrible things and, I'm angry or whatever. But I can look back now and see that I was self-medicating.
Yeah.
I was losing the most precious thing in my life, my marriage, my wife, and my children. I was scared. And also I was not moving on in my goal of being a pastor. As a matter of fact, I was being kind of managed away from that, and yet discouraged from taking promotions at work and moving on. And so I was in a lot of despair when I made those choices, and I self-medicated with them.
Yeah.
I didn't lose my agency. I knew what I was doing, and this is the thing with spiritual abuse. No, you don't lose your agency. You're an adult. You're doing what you're deciding to do, but you're doing it on the basis of information that is wrong and that you have been conditioned to believe.
Yeah.
So that was me. Well, a few years into it, I guess around 1994 or so, a couple of the girls in the church, great kids, they were older than my two girls. They must have been 14 or 13 and 11 or something like that. They told their parents that the pastor had, and I don't remember exactly what it was. I don't remember, kissed them or done something that was not right, obviously. And we just knew nothing at the time. That small admission of a little thing is often kind of the test balloon. Are you going to believe me before I tell you what else he did? Right?
Oh, heartbreak.
Okay. Yeah. So they put out that test balloon, and I took my oldest daughter, out to McDonald's. Everybody left the house and stayed in a hotel, and the pastor was just having an implosion. I think he threatened suicide or something.
Oh, wow.
And so we all kind of left and were staying out at a different place. And I took my oldest daughter, we went out to McDonald's, and I said, so has Pastor Mike has he ever treated you wrong or said something wrong to you or anything? Now don't judge me, because it was 1994. I would say things a lot different now. I'd be a lot more clear.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
okay.
Please, Ken, my goodness. I mean, the milestones that we've taken, it's just like, I mean, even, just the fact that the Me Too movement is so recent, where we're finally acknowledging, sexual violence. And I mean, it really, and even the laws, I mean, you see it in the laws too. It's like, yes, please, no shame in that. We all do our best where we're at the time. Yeah, at the time. Well, now it would be something like a 20 question. Okay, did he ever show you this? Did he ever touch this? Did he? Right.
I mean, but at the time, it was just. So I said that, and she said, no. I said, nothing at all, and everything's okay. She said, sometimes he, talks dirty around me or cusses around me or something. Okay.
Mm.
That was her test balloon.
Yeah.
Now, when I heard that, I responded probably exactly the way her abuser would want me to respond, of like, well, good grief, what kid growing up today watching, The Bodyguard with Whitney Houston doesn't hear cuss words and see all kinds of weird stuff. I thought, thank God, it's not true. And it was true. And we stayed in the church for about another year or so. And I knew, of course, something didn't seem right. So I switched my work around, was home more. I also really cleaned up my act and basically got right with God. That's how we put it, I got right and put aside the drugs and all that, and just started being more present. And that really, within a year or maybe 2 years, we were out. We left.
Yeah.
And then we left with nothing but our little car, shaving kit, some clothing, our, at this time now, 3 children. And we probably took a TV. I know we took my guitar, and there we are driving down the road.
Wow.
And we thought, it's going to take a good 2 or 3 days to get over this.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Yeah, we drove to a hotel in town because we were just too embarrassed to tell our parents, who lived a couple miles away.
Yeah.
We were just too embarrassed to say, I know we've made your life a living hell for the last, 12 years, but we're out now.
Yeah.
So we just needed to be alone.
Yeah.
And I did call them, but nonetheless, we were alone.
And may I ask, Ken, at this point, was there a kind of continued respect happening for the pastor, and it was kind of this seed of doubt that now you were, in your clarity, you were starting to sense that actually had you leave? Did you actually address anything with him? Was there a confrontation, or did you just...
Yeah, that's really good. There was a confrontation, but not with him, with his assistant, who he kind of sent to do the dirty work. And I had told him that I was going to be leaving in a few months. So we were planning for that. And I think it was freaking him out, because when people that could put you in prison, even though they don't know it, but when they're outside of your control, how are you going to control them?
Yeah.
So it was tense, because for about the last 4 months, they knew I was leaving, and that was very tense. The loyalty that a cult member, and that's what I've come to refer to that church as, even though it was Christian and all of that, I'm just going to call it what it was as I see it. The loyalty to the leader of a cult is usually the very last aspect of loyalty that is given up by the member.
Yeah.
You might leave and say, they're a bunch of jerks and I don't want anything to do with them. You might leave and say, I hate the rules. You probably are going to leave and say, I'm not a good disciple, so I'm washing out and leaving. You might even leave because you say, hey, I started studying the theology and it's just wrong. The doctrines are wrong. And, Christian Bible, these kinds of Christians like my background is all about Bible, Bible, Bible. Those are all reasons you might leave. But the last grip on you is the narcissistic leader. And that, sadly, some of the kids who left that church in the following years, and we're talking 25 years now later, they still would say and still have said to me, he's really quite a teacher, though. Great preacher.
Yeah. So
imagine that, a person who has molested children and yet has speaking ability, is somehow, that speaking ability thing is so important that we need to remember that he is really the example of what it means to be a preacher. That's sick. So for me, loyalty to him was the last thing to go, but it left back in the early 90s, not for Sharon. So when we left the church, we left with me saying, I just need for us to be out there and alone as a family. I want to decide the thermostat, and I want to decide what cable channels we get because I'm the dad and I need to be the dad in this family.
Yep.
That's what I said. Now, what I was really feeling was, I hate this guy's guts. He violated my marriage. He seduced my daughter's loyalty away from me to him. And that was with me not even knowing about the seduction or the molestation or anything. So my point was, I hate it here. I hate who I am here. I don't have any friends and I don't trust anybody.
Yeah.
And I especially don't trust, old King David here who's running the show. Yeah. So I wanted out and I lied and did anything I could to just get my family out with my wife and marriage.
Hallelujah.
Sharon on the other. Yeah. And for me, that meant a decision of acknowledging that I would never be a pastor. I felt I was leaving God along with the cult, and that, and I can distinctly remember praying to God, I know it means I'm putting all of this aside. I'm sorry, but I just want to be with my family. I will live in a box. I'll live on top of a garage. I don't care. I want my daughters. I want my wife, and I don't want to be there. And I'm sorry I'm turning my back on you, God, but I'm not good. I can't do it. So I carried extreme failure with me, but I got out and I was just happy to be out.
Yep. Yeah. And, if I could interject here for a second, Ken, one of the things that's kind of striking me that I'm just seeing as like a thread in other stories, and certainly this was the case in my group, and it probably took me many months before this conversation was even alive between some of us who were leaving. But, I see often that with especially male cult leaders, that there's kind of this castration of all men in the community.
Yeah.
To a point where they no longer have power. They're unable to move their families in the way that they would and manage them. And I mean, it's so violating in that regard, and you don't even know it until you've left.
Yeah.
And actually, I found that a lot of the men in our group, it really did kind of take us all like almost a minimum of kind of 6 months to sort of sort through that and go, whoa, the men.
Yeah.
There was such a violation.
Yeah. In these, thank you. That's exactly true. When in these kinds of groups that are male-dominated, what are called complementarian, and in Christianity, that male domination and complementarian might be a little even more devastating than other religious traditions, because the theory of it is embedded in its text itself. I don't believe that, and I don't agree with it, not anymore. And applying what I learned in seminary, I realize I don't buy that anymore. But it is used, and it's very powerful. Yeah. And so for the men, if you can remove the father of a family as a active participant in the protection of the family. Now, I happen to believe that mothers are more vicious protectors of families than men, but nonetheless, that man is there, and I'm speaking of a heterosexual, family unit. Nonetheless, he's in the way. Because a cult leader is insanely jealous of everybody and competitive of everybody. So if he can be neutralized, mostly through altering his wife's view of him, to where she sees him as a spiritual loser, not a good leader of the family, having so many troubles, and also not very effective at loving and understanding her. Not like Pastor, Right. Okay. So in our case, by neutralizing and somewhat emotionally castrating the men, who are really like a bunch of kind of dumb oxen working away and, using drugs and medicating to handle life, while the wives, they would never realize this, but they are unattached and unprotected, then they become kind of cannon fodder. And the only women that really appealed to our particular abuser were women that had grown up religious with very little experience sexually or drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. I think there was an idea of conquest there with him.
Well, and also it reminds me of this kind of principle, that especially in cultic groups, I see so often that it's like people's wonderful gifts that are just kind of innocent are taken advantage of like that.
Yes,
and so that feels very similar to what you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. And people's backgrounds are never accepted. You never can accept the background. The cult leader can't. He attacks and mocks the things that he wants to get rid of. For instance, the religious upbringings of many of the people in the group as being hypocritical, milqued toast, not real Christianity. They're not doing faith. They're just living as hypocrites or whatever. Yeah. And so that had quite an effect on the moms. And then beginning to attack their ability as mothers to raise their children. Yeah. You're ruining your children. You're raising your children to be this and to that. Well, at the end of the day, what it leaves is unprotected children.
And I'm so glad you're breaking this down for us. It's really,
thank you. Yeah.
I've never really thought of it in this particular way, and it's I think again it's so important to hear the different ways that people explain what their experience was, because we've got that variety in the world.
Oh yeah.
So it's my hope that somebody can hear you and see something in a new light, if it is, in fact, a negative impact.
At the end of the day, it made the children vulnerable, especially the girls. Our little boys just grew up out in the woods, just left alone for hours. And that is not a positive way for a little boy to grow up. And that the girls were, I realized, sexualized in just non-physical ways, but nonetheless led to view themselves as sexual beings from a very young age. Yeah. And really, really bad. And there's also something, I'll just say this quickly and move on, because it's just kind of a theory, a Christian thingy that I think through. Ever since in the very first pages of the Bible, where God makes this really bizarre kind of prediction that a child would be given to this woman, and that this child was going to do this astounding thing. He was going to destroy the serpent, which is a representative of Satan, of course. He was going to destroy him, although he would be wounded himself in the process. And so from an almost cosmic theological standpoint, from then on, it's almost as if every mother after that might be saying, is this the one? Is this the child? And every child born from a spiritual standpoint could be looked at by this malevolent person, the devil, and the same question could be asked, is this the one? I think he knew it was going to be a boy, but is this the one that will destroy me? So at the end of the day, my reason for bringing that up is that I believe all evil and all narcissistic leadership, and especially ones that I believe are controlled by a malevolent spiritual motivator like this, they always seek out to injure and hurt children. Just for the principle of it. So there was that thing set up. And so looking back on my experience, and even from a sociological standpoint, you'll find that narcissists always mistreat children. They always treat them like little adults that are transacting something. I give something to the adult and I get something from the adult, and I'm so important to the adult. That these individuals, and it happens in churches, often their children are really mistreated by being related to in such a poor way. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I kind of went on there.
No, it's so interesting. And I appreciate that you brought that element in because it's fascinating to have a little bit of the tie-in of some of the religious biblical teachings.
Yeah,
I think especially for our audience, maybe who aren't so familiar with the Bible,
yeah,
it really fills in some of these foundational elements upon which
yeah,
some of this stuff can happen, you know?
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't really view my talking about cults and my experience as some sort of a way of recruiting people into the Christian faith or something. That would be a pretty bad recruiting motive or recruiting method. Here's what could happen. Now join up. No, but I do feel, and this is just me speaking of my faith of Christianity. I feel that it can't be credible if it can't be explained in a way that takes it all into account where it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Christians often talk about, here's all of the good things. You love Jesus, you have a good church, you go to heaven. It's just really wonderful. But it doesn't have any meaning unless you can say, here's the way it works for battered people, and here's where it can and does really often go wrong. So yeah, that's why I kind of, delve into just staying closely tied to the fact that I'm describing something that is Christian here.
Yeah.
It wasn't a non-Christian cult that claimed to be Christian, but really wasn't because our pastor was a pedophile.
Yeah.
It was Christian. And that's the scandal of Christianity, that bad people can be Christian and still be in a bad church and all of that. But nonetheless, we have to be honest. This happens. And so that's kind of why I go there and make everybody uncomfortable all the time.
Oh, thank you so much, Ken, because I think truly, how are we going to evolve that institution or elements of it if we don't talk about it, And this is where I think also like just this idea and kind of concept around critical thinking that, again, just like communication, is something that many of us really don't learn about in school. Maybe if you were like a philosophy major or, something like that, you kind of go in that direction. But we really have not been taught critical thinking. And the truth is, as I dive deeper and deeper into these realms and really get the information, there truly are people who are holding like you in Christianity, for example, who are holding the beauty of what is, let's say, good, and then also willing to acknowledge what either historically has been discovered is accurate about the Bible, or just willing to explore some of these more insidious elements of destruction, if I might be so bold as to say that, in terms of some of the messaging, hence the whole purity culture movement. I mean, giving little girls messages about their bodies at such a young age and having them start to think about and consider who they are sexually when they're not even thinking that way. And then just having them grow up feeling they're kind of wrong for being a woman and having the bodies that they do, and that they're a temptation inherently is just so damaging, So really, I thank God for people like you and for those who are willing to just engage in these conversations because, I mean, I hate to bring up politics, but it is a great example where we really see, in our current state of the world, it's sort of like, there's such an intense discussion going on around how there really hasn't been a time like this in history politically where it's so you're one or the other. And typically we've had individuals who are really able to hold, principles that they accept or reject on both sides of the fence, that they're certainly open to working with others that have different ideas and thoughts and ways of running government. And it feels very similar to me because this is another version of that is almost just as big.
Yes.
I mean, really big. And we know how Christianity has seeped into, the culture, at least let's talk about the United States for now.
Right.
And so I really, in addition to that reform that you were talking about, where we allow systematically the church to have to abide by the secular laws of our world. And then also, I think the willingness to really have these discussions is where the hope lies for Christianity to persist in the ways that, I'll just be simple, are good.
Yeah. That's really true. It really, I guess, I can only speak to my own experience, but the last few years, I've really been doing some thinking about emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. And I know you're a therapist, so you probably hear about that all the time. But and trying to understand its importance to me as a pastor and as a leader, and I realize that what I need to do is not push people to those polar extremes that we've talked about, and that is what we would call totalism in the cult world. Of course, it's either black or white. You either are or you aren't. There are some issues that I believe are pretty clear, obviously, as a Christian pastor, but I'm not to use the operating principle of totalism to create a world around me where everybody's like me and thinks like me. And what is the best thing I've learned for me as a leader is to be consistently honest and transparent about what I believe. And that has, something that really hasn't gotten me into a lot of trouble. I've got a very sweet church with some wonderful people in it, but they like just knowing where I'm coming from, and along with that, giving them not permission, but just acknowledging that we very well could disagree. And you know what? I love you disagreeing, and I don't have to live in a world where everybody smokes the same brands or what I mean? I don't have to live in that world. All I need to do is be an honest person, and ask if and make myself available to love you and be present with you if that's what you want. And that's been very freeing to me.
Oh, yeah.
I tell that story to kind of bring it back to what we were talking about, just with the kids. A guy who did a lot of research in this area was the Dr. Paul Martin, and he wrote a book.
Wellspring. He ran
Wellspring,
right? Yeah.
Okay, you're aware of that. And the book he wrote, what was the book he wrote? Cult Proofing Your Kids, I think.
Yes.
Maybe not the greatest title in the world. Makes it sound like, how to rust coat your kids like you would your car, or something like that. But anyway, of course, it's just a wonderful, wonderful book. Dr. Martin died years ago. But one of the things he says about it, that issue in the book that really hit me strong, is that the best thing you can do for your kids is to raise them in a home of emotional maturity and critical thinking, to where you sit around the table and maybe your son says, "Dad, I got to be honest with you. I'm looking at Buddhism and it sounds pretty good. I'd like to go check it out." And as a father, you don't go, no son of mine is going to be, belly rubbing the Buddha, one of those crazy Buddhist guys, or no way. Instead, the best environment for the home is to say, well, let's chat a little bit about that. What do you see that you like there? And let's explore it. Suddenly you rob it of its rebellious power in the family unit, but you also set a standard for family relating where you are going to be loved, treasured, valued, no matter where you go and what you do. And I can't force you to love Jesus. Of course not. I can't force you to be a Christian or anything like that. I expect you will not be like my daughters. None of them are the kind of spiritual people that I am exactly. And we have different variations. But at the end of the day, our connection is not going to be prefaced by what you determine to be your beliefs. Now, that's a hard thing for we Christians to say. we don't raise our kids with that as a goal. But if you do that, the likelihood of your child being deceived into a cult is much less. They will not be deceivable as much as the child that's just grown up with an authority figure telling her what you always believe, what we believe. And the reason we believe it is because you are being taught by the smartest people in your life, your mother and I and your pastor. And you set them up for when they say go away to school and somebody smarter comes along.
Yeah.
And says, yeah, here's why you should give me all your money and why you should live in this situation. And you set them up to always follow somebody who seems better, smarter, stronger, more biblical, whatever. So there's really something there about giving our kids a lot of leeway, just loving them wherever they, whatever they're saying.
I'm glad that we're talking about this because I feel like, it's obviously a difficult topic. I mean, every parent wants to have, a grand influence over their child. I mean, we're sort of built to be communal and want to connect in belief systems and such. But, I could even say from sort of another angle, the same principle is true in my personal family and in my example, where I would say that I was raised Presbyterian. My father could care less about going to church. My mom would drag us to Sunday school and we'd say, why isn't dad coming? And she'd say, because.
That answered it all. Yeah.
Right. And we'd continue in our little file and, do what we did. But as I got older, I got very involved and I really loved it. I loved the music and the choir. And so I was singing in the choir and it was an opportunity for me to be with friends and get out of the house during the week and all that stuff. And then I have to say what was interesting when I think back on, the time that I joined my organization, I was somewhere around 23, 24-ish. Okay. I knew I was almost hiding it a little bit from my parents because I knew they were not into spiritual stuff. And I knew that they always kind of had a little thing about me that I was like the weirdo of the family doing the spiritual stuff. And I knew that wouldn't be that acceptable. And so what actually happened for us was that them not being open to that and not wanting me to go at all in that direction really completely shut off any communication that was truly open, because I just felt like I was kind of trying to convince them that what I was doing was good. And they were kind of like, this is really weird. And there were lots of good reasons as to why it was weird. But, it was sort of, I'm sure there was a layer. So their attitude was not the reason that I actually went in and stayed in, but I definitely did not feel like they were a sounding board for me and that it was a place where I could really go to sort of explore when I was having real issues, right in the beginning as they were trying to kind of break me from my parents.
You couldn't come home and say, I found this group. They're really nice to me. I like this and that. I felt a little weird about when I wanted to go home and it was 3:30 and I feel like they tricked me into staying till 5. I mean, you couldn't say that to your family. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And neither could I have done that either. An emotionally healthy home, which a lot of cultures do have more of that kind of health in the family, that nobody would ever join another religion without coming home and talking about it to everybody and saying, hey, here's what happened, and what do you think? And
I was interested in sharing some of the information that Ken focuses on in the House of Friends regarding what makes a church abusive, since honestly, we as a society don't speak that much about this topic, other than those of us, of course, who are in this field. But people tend to just be much more comfortable imagining a strange, mysterious, and therefore kind of foreign cult versus considering what might make a church abusive. After all, the stats in the U.S. alone reveal that many of us have been raised with church, and many of them teach simple lessons that have a positive impact on one's life. As Ken and I discuss, there truly is a growing awareness about religions and even religious teachings having themes that can have extremely damaging effects on believers and or young children and young adults. But let's take a step back out of any evaluation regarding what someone believes, and rather let's dive into these solid principles that create an incredible guide for individuals, churchgoers, and those who are in service to these communities by looking at what I'll call Ken's guideposts to what makes a church unhealthy or even abusive. He believes that there are 7 indicators of spiritually abusive churches that include deception, isolation, elitism, fear, mandated disclosure, and trauma upon leaving the church. We will take a look at the first few in this outro. This will obviously be a high-level exploration, as Ken says, more than what I'll address. And of course, I highly recommend this book as a quick read with a lot of great insight and understanding around these dynamics. So we'll dive right in. Deception. Ken writes about members of abusive churches don't receive what they were promised when they were encouraged to join. Abusive churches do not share their full stories or agendas with those they seek to recruit. So, for example, they don't come and say, hey, we're the only true church in this town. All the other churches are phonies and spineless, uncommitted groups of people playing at religion. We, on the other hand, are the real deal. This would obviously be pretty off-putting to new members or first-time visitors. Instead, abusive churches simply present their own teachings and truth claims as the only acceptable way to believe, period. Indeed, although it's unstated and unacknowledged, the first and devastating commitment that members make to an abusive church is that they will allow the church to be their greatest authority on the determination of truth. They'll listen to the leaders first to determine what truth is. Soon the reliance on the abusive church for truth will become fiercely exclusive. There simply will be no outside source of information that they can trust. Once they believe that the church, through its leaders and members, is the final source of truth, they begin to base their decision-making on what they are told by the abusive church, and they become controlled by the church. A common way that members of abusive churches are deceived is when they are promised the spiritual benefits they will experience as they participate in church life will be commensurate with the degree of commitment they make to the church. Many people are also manipulated into joining by the promise of close friendships within a Christian, healthy community. And everyone wants to be valued, respected, and viewed with affection and warmth by friends and family alike. And Ken quotes, a fellow survivor told me, I joined that church simply because I thought I would be loved and valued for who I am, just like the Bible says. Instead, I was only noticed and valued when I was doing well, keeping the rules and expectations of the church. I guess what it boils down to is that they promised me at the beginning that I would be loved unconditionally, but what I received was the most conditional love that is humanly possible. The particular claims and promises made to new members are varied and tailored to their desires and hopes. Often these expectations are shared with the new member by other, more tenured members who themselves are still living in the hope of experiencing what they had been promised. But in the end, the members learn that the kindness and acceptance they seek is conditioned upon their continued devotion to the church and particularly its pastor. They simply do not experience what was promised. To repeat, people do not join abusive churches. They are recruited into churches that make wonderful, personally tailored promises to them of a blessed, healthy, and satisfying social and spiritual life. They are not told of the demands that will be made on them, the social pressures they will live under, the challenges that will follow. They are never encouraged to speak with former members to understand the experiences and perspectives of people who have decided not to attend the church. They are never let in on the finances of the church. They are never told beforehand of the burdensome expectations and demands that will be placed on their time, their outside relationships, their marriages, and their parenting practices. Instead, they are promised great gains in all these areas if only they will take the plunge, count the cost, commit, follow the master, and so on. And therein is the deceit. For in the abusive church, members will never receive what is promised, no matter how much blood and sweat they lose to gain it. Ken's second topic, loss. Members' resources will increasingly flow from the members into the abusive church. Abusive churches do not exist to enrich the lives of their members. Rather, they enrich the lives of their leaders, who demand the unfailing loyalty, obedience, and singular attachment of each member, often expressed in that member handing over increasing amounts of personal resources. The most obvious resource that comes to mind is money. Abusive churches pressure their members to contribute amounts that are excessive and damaging to their financial, material health. Often leaders solicit extra financial gain for what they may refer to as special needs, gifts, and opportunities that relate to the mission of the church. So how do abusive churches get away with this? They usually work up to such robberies by establishing a powerful influence over each member's most precious, irreplaceable treasure, time. Presented with what is often an exhausting, dizzying array of activities, new members are expected to attend most, if not all, of the ministries and activities offered at the church. Members may be told that they are invited, but they understand that they are really expected to attend midweek services and studies, early morning prayer meetings, classes for training in evangelism, or other faith-related activities. The continued drain on the resources of members can be measured not solely by the money that they give over to the church, but also through the opportunities for personal, material, and vocational gain that they give up for the church. Abusive churches often rob young marriages and parents of time with their family. They also indirectly take their members' resources by discouraging them from pursuing professional and personal goals, particularly when pursuing those goals deflects resources and possibly members' attendance away from the church. In this section around the principle of loss, I love that Ken incorporated some comments by the social psychologist Alexandra Steen and her recent work, Terror, Love, and Brainwashing, Attachment in Cults and Authoritarian Systems. She presents the totalist leader, and for this discussion, the abusive, narcissistic pastor, that they are essentially more driven by the need for undiluted attachment from members than by the desire for gain of material and resources. She writes, "The need to control others as a means of guaranteeing attachment to the one consistent feature of the cult leaders. Not all of them seek to increase wealth as a result of their domination of followers. But of course, once a leader has succeeded in controlling group members' attachment to him or herself, then those other benefits can accrue as well. In other words, take over their lives, and the money and everything else will follow." Ken's third guidepost: isolation. Abusive churches discourage their members from forming and maintaining healthy relationships with non-members unless the non-members are candidates for recruitment into the church. Although it is rarely expressed as a rule to be followed, abusive churches often isolate their members from their non-member families and friends. The family, friends, and coworkers of the member are either subtly or openly held in a negative light, and their significance to the member is disregarded, if not outright challenged. Members may be led to believe that those who are not members of the church are truly substandard people who are unworthy of time, affection, and attention. Unless there seems a likelihood of them being recruited into the church, family and friends are gradually pushed to the edges of the members' thoughts and concerns. Members may begin to believe that their former friends, their family, and their coworkers are antagonists, standing in the way of the members' continued spiritual growth and availability to the church. The questions, concerns, and confusion regarding the fanatical commitment the member has made to the church and its powerful hold over them are perceived by the member as unfair, intrusive, critical, nagging, and unenlightened. Every abusive church is a communal expression and product of the dysfunction and narcissism of an abusive pastor. Even if the pastor has died and others have taken his place, sometimes the isolation is just a result of a bad pastor being jealous of his members expressing affection or value for anyone other than himself or his church. But the very process of thought reform that occur in abusive churches also depend on isolation of members from contrary ideas and perspectives that threaten the church's teachings, policies, and behaviors. Leaders of such churches simply do not want members to hear any other views, and they certainly do not want them to critically evaluate what they're being told in the church. Thought reform is a subversion and malevolent manipulation of how a person thinks. So abusive thought reforming churches put a lot of effort into changing the way their members think about people who are outside the church, even if those people are the family members, old friends, and coworkers who used to be the best friends the member had. And then Ken quotes some of the typical phrases some of you may have encountered, such as, "Who needs those friends? You've got us. Who needs your family? We're your family now." Topic number 4, elitism. Abusive churches believe they are better than all others, and they view other churches with disdain. The abusive church convinces members that its teachings, traditions, and practices are not only faithful to the Bible and the Christian faith, but are the most faithful to those things than any other church in the area. Abusive pastors are not shy to point out the supposed flaws of their neighboring churches. The elitism that permeates life in an abusive church has no correspondence to reality and smacks of the very hyper-religiousness and pride condemned in the Bible. But it does accomplish its goal of solidifying members' confidence, not only that they have chosen the right church to belong to, but also, as they are often told, that God Himself brought them there. It is an intoxicating confidence, dueling the members' sensitivity to the pressure, manipulation, and overweening control that the church has laid on his shoulders. So thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this outro, just a little bit of a deeper dive into Ken's own words and these 7 guideposts. If you would like to hear more, you will in the outro for part 2. And we look forward to rejoining you there. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Project Hope podcast. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to subscribe and comment. You can always get in touch with me at jennifer-french.com. And please let me know any specific topics of interest. And of course, I'm always interested in your stories, whether you've left an organization of high demand, high control, or if you're an individual struggling with the knowing that someone you love is in such a situation. I am here for you. Think critically, take heart, and be free.